regard you as an enemy, I can just dismiss you. I mean, I could dismiss you in the sense of I could ignore you. I could just say, don't listen to that Brad. Whatever he says is stupid. He's an enemy. It just everything that comes out of his mouth is evil. And even if it sounds good, he's being cagey.
Mhm.
And when he sounds like he's nice, you know that's really dangerous because he's devious. He's doing it to trick you in some way. So don't listen to him. So that's what's happened when Brad becomes an enemy. It's a very convenient way, in some ways, of not having to actually engage with another person with whom you disagree.
Mark Juergensmeyer, what do you make of the phrase that war is politics by other means?
Well, it comes out of context. I mean, it sounds nice and it makes sense, but in the original context, which was by a Prussian general who was trying to figure out what war was, he came to the conclusion is that absolute war is an alternative reality based on totally annihilating the other. But he said most war in practice isn't like that. Most war in practice, people have to make compromises because you have to live with people, and you might want to take over that territory after you've controlled it. So you don't want to destroy the whole thing, and so it really is an extension of politics. So that was his compromise with his absolutistic notion of war. But what fascinates me is the absolutistic notion that behind the idea of war is an alternative reality in which people are things and that they can be destroyed easily without any kind of moral sensitivity. It's not our normal life. It's an absolutely peculiar construct of the imagination to think in terms of war. We just take it for granted, but it really is a hideous notion, and yet we're stuck with it. It's around us in all of our movies, all of our video games. We're just saturated with ideas of war because there's something about that alternative reality that is enormously compelling.
Yeah. You say it's an alternative reality. War seems so real. When you get into it, and the idea of it, what makes it an alternative reality?
Well, that's why it's a reality.
Yeah.
And so is religion. It's these realities that are in our mind, which of course, in a sense, all reality is in our mind. We just make sense of stuff around us and we put it into a framework that makes sense. I'm a sociologist, so there's a famous sociological book called The Social Construction of Reality that argues that all reality is really kind of in our mind, how we've socially constructed it. I mean, the table over there, it was a table I sat down and eat at it. But if you put it at the front of a church, it could become an altar.
Hmm.
And from a termite's perspective, it's an edible feast. It all depends on your perspective. And so war is a different way of looking at reality.
Mhm.
And when you're in that alternative reality, it's very real. I mean, after all, if you're a soldier and you're in the midst of battle, it's about the most real thing you can possibly imagine. But as soon as you get out of it, then suddenly life changes. I don't know whether you saw the movie The Hurt Locker. Did you see that movie, Brad?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there's a wonderful scene where the guy is, he's been blowing up landmines, doing kinds of weird crap in different parts of the world. And then he's out and he comes back and he's in a grocery store looking at all these different boxes of breakfast food. And he's saying, what the hell is this? And he re-ups, he goes back, he can't take this. He can't take our reality. He's
Yeah,
so,
that
he's
is a
so,
transition for sure.
yeah,
Coming out
exactly.
of a military environment, or certainly a warfighting environment,
That's
to
right.
see the rest of the world.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, Mark, you talked. We're starting to touch on religion as well. Religion and alternative reality, war and alternative reality.
Yeah.
What is
The religion can do
the
the same
religion?
thing. It can mess with your mind.
Yeah.
I mean, you can be, with those of us who know, people who we regard as Jesus freaks are totally into it. I mean, from us as outsiders, it looks weird, but from inside, it's the most real thing in the world. I mean, I grew up in a very pious, Protestant household in the Midwest, and boy, religion was real. When you're in it and you have that sense of salvation and transformation, your life has changed. I mean, I walked down the sawdust path, and I got to tell you, I was saved more than one time. It's thrilling. But then when you're not in it, it's just kind of weird.
Mm. So, Mark, what do you think makes these two go together?
Well, because they're both alternative realities, in a sense, they're competitive. They're different. It's hard to imagine war as religion and religion as war. But on the other hand, they can buttress each other. And every notion of war involves religion in some way. God is on our side.
Mm.
That's just sort of an axiom that we just take. I mean, after 9/11, when the World Trade Centers came falling down, the popular "God Bless America" was on the banners, on bumper stickers. People. There was something about something horrible happened to us, but man, God is on our side, and that notion that every war, every alternative reality of war is buttressed by the alternative reality of religion in some sense, is so common. There's not an army in the world that hasn't been blessed by priests or rabbis or or mullahs or whoever, whoever blesses things. They're out there blessing them in order to, of course, protect the troops in some ways, but certainly in the minds of those people who are leading the war, they are verifying that God is on their side and will lead them to victory. So, in the most basic kind of way, there is this connection. And then there are degrees of connection in which war, religion insinuates itself more deeply into the mental construct of war. And in an extreme sense, you have this kind of absolutistic notion that we were talking about earlier of apocalyptic war,
Mm.
which is really kind of the total merger of war. That's when war is religion and religion is war. It's not very common. In most cases, war is politics by other means. In other words, it is in the war rooms of presidents and dictators and whoever's conducting the war. These are cold calculations. It's certainly not going to risk their lives. It's going to risk the lives of these stupid people who have been drafted into fighting for them. I mean, I'm saying stupid from the point of view of a lot of leaders who have made a moral disengagement between what they're asking people to do and the kind of ultimate sacrifices that people perform. But often that ultimate sacrifice is justified and legitimized by religion.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sacred duty, and even the kamikaze pilots in the Second World War for Japan believed that they were doing this for the emperor, and the emperor in a kind of divine sense. The notion it was an emperor worship in Japan, the feeling that this was a religious calling. And you see this in Islam, where people feel that this undertaking jihad as a sacred duty and that they will receive blessings in heaven. And it's there in Christianity and Judaism, this feeling that often this ultimate sacrifice that war demands of people is justified by religion. Now, in the minds of people who are trying to use war in order to gain territory or control or political power or whatever, it's a much colder calculation. For them, it's politics by other means, but not for the people who are undertaking it, most of whom have really very little knowledge of what the strategic purpose of the warfare is.
Mm-hmm.
And really knowledge of the whole idea of the martial exercise. They're simply in it. I have a lot of friends who are soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan. I've talked with them quite a bit, as probably you have, about what it's like to actually be in the battlefield. I haven't, but they have. And for them, it's an immersive experience. And I said, but one of the guys I know is a kind of a left-wing radical now, is very anti-war, but he served a couple of duties in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I said, Peter, why did you keep on going back? He said, for my buddies.
Mm.
I wasn't fighting for any cause. I was fighting for my brothers on my left side and my right side. And he said, when you're in that situation, it's a kind of it's an enormous rush for one thing to be in that kind of life or death situation. But you fight for your own survival, of course, but even more important for your comrades, those people who you've grown to know and to love and defend. And there's this extraordinary bond that one has really in very few other situations in life, maybe in sports in some cases, but not quite like being together in the battlefield.
Mm-hmm.
And so that they are immersed in an alternative reality that has its own meaning, quite devoid of any other political strategic sense. It is what it is. It's a real thing. And that's I say often religion does the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Once you're in it, you can be totally in it. Those Jesus freaks we were talking about, or whatever. Once you're in it, and it has a kind of meaning and intensity of its own.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's the language element too. You talked about how in war we demonize the enemy, for example. What do you make of the language of war and how that melds with religious language?
Well, in both cases, it's in absolutistic terms.
Mm.
There's no compromise. You're either, in religious terms, you're saved, you're not saved.
Yeah.
You're uh, and and in some branches of religion, particularly evangelical Christianity, it can be quite extreme. If I'm a church-going Episcopalian, but from the point of view of evangelical Christian, I'm not a Christian.
Mm.
I'm not their kind of Christian. I don't wear my religiosity on my sleeve. I don't broadcast to the world that I've been saved. There's something soft and mushy and incomplete. They want a hard Christianity. They want a Christianity that has no fuzzy boundaries. You're either in or out. You know who's in and you know who's out. And so there's that kind of absolutism of both war and religion. Who the good guys are and who the bad guys are, and who's saved and who's not saved. It's just as distinct as black and white.
And Mark, one thing you pointed out in your book too that I found interesting was, and I saw this in the military, many military chaplains are evangelical Christians. So you have this organization that seems to attract these religious professionals that reinforce these ideas, and so it's all around you.
That's absolutely true. And they're chaplains and they're chaplains. I mean, I've talked with many chaplains, and often they say they're not pro-war. They're not there to promote war. They're there to comfort humans. They see people who are facing a very traumatic situation, and they simply want them to know that regardless of what else happens, God is always with them. But it's also true, as you say, that there are people whose kind of ideological religion aligns with the purpose of warfare in a way that then does make it possible for them to see not just the individual persons are being blessed by God, but the whole venture is being blessed by God, and that the soldiers should be honored to be a part of this sacred service. I don't know whether the evangelical chaplains that you encountered spoke this way, but you would probably know better than I do.
We always treasured our chaplains, absolutely. It's just the framework of evangelical Christianity that you've described, and the way that framework mixes so tightly with war. Now, seeing that so many professionals would find that match, it was eye-opening for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's good insight.
Yeah. So earlier you talked about September 11th a little bit, and Japanese kamikaze pilots, Pearl Harbor. What are the differences between those elements? I think when 9/11 happened, we were very quick to compare them and to draw similarities.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, the only similarity is something shocking happened, and suddenly our sense of the world changed just in a blink of the eye, and we were suddenly in a framework of war. That was what is common about both of those elements. Almost everything else is different. I mean, in the case of the kamikaze pilots, they were backed by an imperial army, and it was a war between nation states, and not just between nation states, imperial ones, Germany on one hand and Japan on the other. And this, of course, 9/11 was not comparable in any sense to that. This is just a ratty bunch of people up in a cave in Afghanistan plotting a very devious and clever uh, plan that worked, but the number of people directly involved in it were just minuscule by comparison. I mean, Al Qaeda, even at its largest, was in the hundreds, maybe thousands, but it was not a nation state. It wasn't even ISIS, but yet it created the same kind of shock and the same kind of sense of the world at war that really transformed American society almost overnight. And we forget in the case of World War II that FDR, who wanted very much to support Europe, wasn't able to do so because it was a huge resistance, an American first resistance to America being engaged in that way. There was a huge American first movement, very isolationist, and all that just transformed in a blink of the eye after Pearl Harbor. Mm-hmm. And suddenly America was at war. And the same thing happened after 9/11. Now, I had interviewed people who had bombed the World Trade Center scarcely 10 years before, the same crowd of characters, by the way. Ramzi Youssef, the key person in the attack on 9/11, on the World Trade Center in 93, was, in fact, the nephew of Sheikh Khalid Mohammed, who is the key figure in organizing the 9/11 attack. I mean, a lot of people think it was Osama bin Laden, but it was 9/11 Commission report says it was Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and that makes sense. I have no idea what Osama bin Laden's involvement was with 9/11, if any, other than he knew about it apparently in advance. What else? I don't know. But in any event, we think of him as he's been the figurehead of that whole enterprise, which is okay. But all I'm saying is that there was an earlier attempt to try to bring down the World Trade Center, and those people were put in prison, and I was able to talk with them, which was great. I mean, great for me. I could try to figure out what was in their minds and why they were doing it. So when 9/11 happened, my first reaction is, well, they finally got it. And it, of course, was horrible because to see people killed in this tragic way is just sickening. But I thought, well, now maybe we'll take these people seriously and try to locate them and bring them to justice. But that's not exactly what happened. What happened was there was a war tribunal, and they went out to Camp David, and the one person who spoke against this, of course, was the general in the cabinet, who said, "This is we're not entering war. This is just a ratty bunch of terrorists, and we need to find them, track them down, and bring them to justice." But the next day, George Bush on television said, "These are not just a terrorist act. This is an act of war." And so suddenly, headlines in the newspapers were war. I went back over the newspapers. The first day, they didn't use the word war. They just said terrible thing happened. One had the San Francisco Chronicle had a picture of the World Trade Center collapsing, and the banner headline says "the bastards," but they didn't use the word war. That happened the second day, and in quotes, and it was in quotes because George Bush said, "This is not just a terrorist act. This is an act of war." And so from there on, War on Terror became the banner logo on not just on Fox News, but on most news channels. And for 10 years, that was the major kind of central focal of American foreign policy, was the War on Terror, whatever that means.
Yeah.
but it put the people in a mindset of war. I was traveling on the East Coast and actually giving a talk on religion and war at the time, and I was able to kind of walk down the Lower Manhattan and see the remnants of the attack within a couple of days after it happened. So then when I got back to California, I was met at the airport by a wife of a friend of mine who collapsed in my arms and said, "Are we going to war?" And so even if Bush hadn't said it, it was a Pearl Harbor moment in the sense of making people suddenly think in terms of war, which horrified me because I thought this was not a very efficient and effective way to deal with a problem. I mean, I would much rather we had maybe an international posse, international hunt to locate these people and bring them to justice in some kind of international tribunal, kind of like the Nuremberg trials, because people from like 80 different countries were in the World Trade Center when it collapsed. And so it was not just the US that was affected, it was many other countries. But that didn't happen. And Bush didn't want to work with either for us or against us, was his policy at the time. And it was a war on terror, and we're going to get these people. And then soon after, he said, we're not going to just get them, but any country that harbored them. And I heard that, and I said, bingo, he's going to attack Afghanistan. and the reason why, well, first of all, because he could. I mean, we needed to attack something. It wouldn't, after the American embassies had been bombed by Al Qaeda in Africa, Bill Clinton sent some bombs up into a pasture in Afghanistan, trying to attack an Al Qaeda cap, and of course they had moved before the missiles could strike, and they just killed a bunch of sheep. So I knew that was not going to work for Bush. He's going to have to do something. But what? And then the answer was clear. Of course, he's going to attack Afghanistan because he can and because nobody cared. I mean, the Taliban at that time had virtually no support. There were just, I think the UAE and Pakistan were the only two countries that recognized its existence. And Pakistan immediately terminated that. So, nobody was going to come to the Taliban's defense. So it was a very easy picking. And it was also easy picking in the sense that the Taliban was a coalition of tribal leaders. So as soon as they all saw that the Taliban was falling, they just like rats jumping off a ship. They got off before the government fell. And so it was easy pickings. The United States military could quickly take down the Taliban and control the country in a matter of a few days, few weeks. And then what? And then what?
Yeah.
Of course, got
Mark,
mired.
that kind of lends itself to a question that I had when I was in the military, which was we were in this war on terror.
Yeah.
And I wondered, how do we win? And you kind of chuckled at the idea of a war on terror. What do you think of winning that war? Was there something to win?
Not really. I mean, terrorism as a device. It's like a war against machine guns. It's an instrument of anti-authoritarian militant activity, and so you eventually eradicate it when you eradicate the causes of it. But that's not done militarily. What can be done militarily is to try to find pockets of people who are engaged in these acts and to take them out. But the very act of doing that, in many cases, produced more terrorists. And this is what happened throughout the Muslim world. When first one Muslim country and then a second was invaded and occupied by the US, then the kind of hostility, the anger, allowed for many other cells to develop, and Al Qaeda actually grew in strength as a result of that. Now, ultimately, of course, it petered out. Ultimately, most of these movements do peter out, but usually for internal causes. They just aren't able to. They're kind of fictional entities to begin with, and often joined by young people as they get older, realize that this is a boat that's going nowhere, and they jump off. So most movements collapse from within.
Mhm.
This is the subject of one of my recent books about how these extremist movements end, and we think they're destroyed militarily, and often that does have some impact on them. But even in the case of ISIS, for example, the old militants I talked with in Iraq and Syria, uh, really blame their own leadership in the collapse of the movement. It was weakened from within before it was destroyed from without. So these movements capture imagination for a period of time, but they don't have they don't have a long lifespan in most cases.
Mhm. Mark, that reminds me of another thing with language and that I read in your book. What is the root, the English root of the word war?
Oh, well, it goes to wera, WERRA, which is actually cognate with worst, which
Hmm.
is a German word for, a frankfurter or a sausage, where it's just a mixed up confusion of things.
Yeah,
And it means a mixed up confusion of things.
yeah,
It does kind of accurately state the sense of warfare. And if you've been in a battlefield situation, as I take it you have, then I think you could probably identify with that, with the so-called fog of war, just the madness of a situation where there don't seem to be any stable points.
yeah. The word in your writing that stuck out to me was chaos as well.
Yeah,
And yet war seems this clarifying force in a way. It seems to help people make sense of chaos. How is that?
war in the mind, in some ways, is a more um, interesting and satisfying structure than war in reality.
Mm,
Because war in the mind, the idea of war, it gives a very clear sense of the landscape, the moral landscape around you. You know who the good guys are, and you know who the bad guys are, and you know how to take care of them. They can. It's like video games. It's one of the reasons why video games are so attractive and why they're always full of war. When you ask a 12-year-old boy who spends all of his day and night often playing video games, what they like about it is says, "Oh, it's fun." Why is it fun? Oh, well, we know who the good guys are and the bad guys are. And if we lose, well, we just start another game.
yeah, that clarifying thing is very powerful, and it seems to just sort of ride past a certain logic in the mind. You mentioned earlier how perhaps politicians, people who are making decisions about war, would see the people who go to war as naive or stupid or something like that in comparison to the cold, calculated decisions. And I've seen in my personal life people use the phrase war to manipulate others. If someone kind of does their bidding, they'll say, "Oh yeah, we're winning the war," or you did something good on my behalf. You're starting a war, and it immediately sets this us versus them manipulative dynamic as well. Do you see it as a manipulation?
Sure. I mean, do I see the metaphor of war as a
Yeah,
form of manipulation?
or maybe the whole thing, as a way to just to make people see things in, as you say, absolute terms.
Sure. I mean, but by definition, war is an attempt to try to force your sense of what is real and appropriate on other people,
Mm,
uh, lethally if necessary.
yeah.
If they stand in the way, you just simply have to get rid of them. And you're entitled to do so because of the power of the vision of your rectitude, the feeling that you are absolutely right. And there's few times in our life when most of life is shades of gray after all.
Mm,
And there are few times in our life that we can kind of have the moral clarity and certainty that what we're doing is absolutely right. But war gives us that. And that's one of the reasons why it's so empowering that for everybody has messy lives, and they're indecisive about what to do and what's right and what's wrong. But when you're put into a situation where it's very clear what is right and what's wrong and what you should do, there's something very empowering about that.
Yeah.
Even though you have been made into a pawn, it's still for the person who's in that situation. You know what to do. You know what the job is. You know what the job is and what you have to do, and you have the moral authority to do it. So it has to be empowering in some way. I can understand why that guy who came back from in the Hurt Locker and he came back to those breakfast food boxes in the aisle of the supermarket felt so out of order. How was he going to choose breakfast food?
Yeah. So, Mark, we've talked about how religion can buttress warfare. It seems warfare, the idea of warfare, can also buttress religion, that we can find ourselves in a state of spiritual warfare, that we are in the middle of a battle between good and evil, and that this idea of war affirms our religion. How does that work?
Oh, you're absolutely right. Every religion is full of war.
Mm,
I mean, if you look at the scriptural background, some of the bloodiest and most hideous battles are in the Bible,
mm,
in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, when I was doing my book on religious terrorism, the only scriptural reference I could find where God itself is described as being a terrorist is in the book of Exodus in the Hebrew Bible, where God says, I will throw my terror before me and slay all my enemies. And you have the vision of Amalek, where these people you just have to destroy them completely. They're not redeemable. Can't be saved in any regard. They're just beyond that. And all you can do is just get rid of them, all of them, including the children and the women, everybody. And this is a commandment of God. So when Netanyahu used that term in talking about the Palestinians in Gaza, people around the world, including in Israel, where the anti-war movement is very strong. I mean, recently there were like 800,000 people parading in the streets of Tel Aviv against the continuation of the war in Gaza and demanding the release of the ceasefire and the release of the captives. But when you use that term Amalek, it just chills through people's spine. And Netanyahu very quickly said, "Oh, he didn't mean that. He didn't mean that. He meant that in terms of Hamas. It has to be hunted down and destroyed completely, but not everybody in Gaza, except, of course, the number of people in Gaza that have been killed is just horrendous, and the number is mounting."
So, Mark, we've established that war, religion, they go hand in hand, they support each other. Does being religious make you more prone to fight a war? Is war a cause of religion? I mean, is religion rather a cause of war?
No, I mean, very simple answer is religion doesn't cause anything. It's not like it doesn't exist separate from us. It's a way in which we see the world. And I don't mean that to diminish the power of religious. I'm an active church-going religious person myself, but simply to state the truth. And many theologians discuss it in just this way. I mean, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the famous German theologian, talked about religionless Christianity, where he thought religion gets in the way of Christianity sometimes, the way in which we build up this structure of religiosity and churches and ritual and so forth. It gets in the way of the purity of spirituality. Many young people now are turning against organized religion for exactly that reason. But they claim that they're spiritual, not religious. But the point is that, yeah, there are these images of war. When I was a kid growing up in the Midwest, we used to sing "Onward, Christian Soldiers," going as to war. And I remember a revival preacher coming in the summer dressed up in camouflage, and he said, "This is, you people don't get it. There's a war going on, a battle between good and evil, and right and wrong, and religion and irreligion. And the time has come right now to pick up the sword of faith and come and fight for Lord Jesus and walk down the sawdust path and be saved and hallelujah. And everybody, okay, I'll do it. That sounds great. So, but of course, he meant it as a metaphor, and war becomes a powerful metaphor within religion, and that's the way in which the warfare in the Hebrew Bible is usually interpreted. If preachers have that bit of scripture that's they're saddled with to preach on and Sunday morning, then they find some way to talk about it in metaphorical terms. That there isn't, it's not a real physical battle. It's a battle, a spiritual battle between good and evil and right and wrong. So the metaphor of war is very strong within religion I think for the reasons that I mentioned at the outset of our discussion, that it's a similar alternative reality. And it's similarly absolutistic in the way in which it views the world. And so images of war fit very easily within the idea of religion, the way in which religion views reality in absolutistic terms of good and evil and right and wrong, and the good guys and the bad guys, and to be saved is to be a part, of course, the good guys. So warfare is an easy metaphor for religion, but it's just that. Very seldom is religion actually, the idea of religion engaged deeply in warfare, other than the way in which we earlier talked about war appropriating religion, and how religion becomes a very useful device in blessing the troops and baptizing the efforts of war. And the big exception is apocalyptic war. And that is when religion and warfare emerged. And often in recent movements around the world, including Al Qaeda and ISIS and many others, including Christian militia, there is a sense of the two being merged. And that's remarkable. That doesn't happen very often in human history, where war is thought to be religion and religion is thought to be war. Usually within a religious template, war is a metaphor. And usually within the war template, religion is an ally and helps to strengthen, baptize their efforts. But the two are not merged, except in instances of what I call cosmic war, and these kind of apocalyptic battles where religion and warfare are united in a kind of horrendous way.
So, Mark, you're citing theologians and things on this topic. In your book, you also cite Sam Harris, a new atheist, who has sort of a criticism of that idea. The quote that you have in your book is from Sam Harris: "Religion is the most prolific source of violence in our history." So what do you make of Sam Harris's argument?
It makes no sense. Religion can't do anything by itself. It's not like it's a disembodied thing that has the ability to be violent or to be anything else. Religion is simply a way in which people look at reality, or an alternative reality, in the way that I've discussed it. And so people are violent, people are peaceful, people are calm, people are restorative, people are savage, people are wonderful. And religion is all of those things as well.
Yeah, you're putting a lot of nuance on what people are and the different dimensions. With war, we get really clear enemies, and it seems so black and white that we can dehumanize them with terms. We don't call them people anymore. We can call them this or that. What is it that makes the idea of an enemy so attractive?
Oh, well, if you and I disagree about things and we simply disagree, then, I could be annoyed with you, and I could try to find ways to puncture your balloon and, come up with a clever little retorts and so forth. But if I regard you as an enemy, I can just dismiss you. I mean, I could dismiss you in the sense of I could ignore you. I could just say, don't listen to that Brad. Whatever he says is stupid. He's an enemy. Everything that comes out of his mouth is evil. And even if it sounds good, he's being cagey.
Mhm.
And when he sounds like he's nice, you know that's really dangerous because he's devious. He's doing it to trick you in some way. So don't listen to him. So that's what's happened when Brad becomes an enemy.
Mhm.
It's a very convenient way, in some ways, of not having to actually engage with another person with whom you disagree, because now that they've become an enemy, you can just dismiss them.
Mhm.
You know, you can go beyond that and actually dismiss them. Just all right, just get rid of him. If it really disturbs, it really trouble, then I feel like I have the moral license and maybe even obligation to physically kill him.
Mhm.
This is what happens to the Shia in Iraq from the point of view of ISIS. When the Shia were regarded as satanic beings, then it became an obligation not just to attack them, but to kill them because you want to get rid of elements of Satan in the world. When that is your temple of imagination, when you have not just enemized another person, I'm making the word enemy into a verb,
I get it.
but you satanized another person, made that person into a satanic being, then that gives you enormous power over them and moral license to destroy them.
Mhm. Yeah, this moral license, this moral high ground. It seems we moralize our situations and we make the enemy morally inferior. But you've met these people, though. Some of them, I mean, that we talk about with things like the terrorists who have bombed places and things. What
Oh,
was your
a lot
what
of
was
it.
your experience with them?
That's my sociological method. You
Yeah,
know, my
yeah,
if you want to know what people think, you go and talk to them. It seems to me
right.
pretty obvious, but you'd be amazed at how many people who are in the business of terrorist analysis have never met a terrorist,
Mm,
and think they know what they think. But that's the problem. I don't know what they think. You have to go and talk to them and try to get inside their minds. So
yeah.
yes, I've talked with a lot of people who are either directly engaged in terrorist acts or supporters.
And what is that like? I mean, are they different? Do you sense something? Do you get a gut feeling?
The really troubling thing is they seem enormously normal. I mean, it would be so easy if I could sense a pathology, if
Mm,
I sense some sort of if they were deeply disturbed psychologically or troubled individuals in some way, then somehow it would be easier to explain. It's much more difficult when it's easy to understand why bad people do bad things. It's really difficult to understand why good people do bad things, or decent people, or people who seem otherwise so normal.
mm,
I mean, when I went to managed to break into prison and talk with the ringleader of the first attack on the World Trade Center, Mahmoud Abu Lima, and he was brought in chains because they were worried that he would try to attack me and hold me hostage, and they're surrounded by guards, and they emptied out the whole dining room so I could talk with him. He came down, came in and sat across from me, and I was astonished. He just smiled. He looked like the nicest guy. He loved talking. His English was pretty good. So he'd lived in Europe for a while, then the United States. He was sort of freckled, red-haired, which is unusual for an Egyptian. But full of conversation. He loved to talk, and not all that pious. He said, "Look, damn this, shit this." It was not like I don't know what you expect a religious extremist to be like, but he wasn't like that.
yeah.
He just seemed the most normal person in the world until the topic came to religion and politics, and then his eyes would glaze and he'd look over at me and he'd look at me intensely and say, "Mr. Mark, you just don't see it." He says, "There's a war going on. There's a battle
Mm,
between good and evil and right and wrong and religion and irreligion. And your government is the enemy, Mr. Mark. You just, they're hiding the truth from you. They're not letting you see what you have to. Somebody has to grab you and shake you awake. We have to let you know what's really happening." So I suddenly, when something went off in my mind, I said, "Well, is that the reason why people bomb buildings?"
mm,
And he just looked back and he said, "Well, now you know."
mm.
Oh,
Yeah. Now he tells you that you don't see what's going on and that you've been tricked. I imagine that, a person who would speak to someone who had been talked into something like, a suicide bombing, we might say, no, you don't see what's going on. You're being tricked. You're being used. You're a pawn. How do you sort that out when these forces that we've talked about, religion and war, these ideas are so strong and so motivating?
Well, I don't try to argue him out of it.
Hmm.
I mean, my job was to find out what he was thinking about. And you can say, well, you lost an opportunity, but not really. First of all, he wouldn't have accepted it.
Sure.
It would have been a futile argument, and I would have lost the opportunity to learn more about what was in his mind, what he was thinking. I think it was quite clear that he knew that I didn't I didn't agree with him. I mean, I certainly didn't say anything that would give him any encouragement to say, "Oh, yes, that's right." Of course, I wouldn't say that. Uh, but I didn't try to say, "Well, let's look at the scriptures," and that's a big mistake actually. When people try
Mm.
to de-radicalize some of these guys, they bring in moderate mullahs and moderate, I mean, if they're Muslim, and to try to point out the error of their ways and how they have a bad theological interpretation of scripture and so forth. But they're immediately dismissed
Mm.
because if your mindset is in this kind of bubble, this reality, and you think you know what you know, then anybody who comes up with a counter argument, you just dismiss out of hand. You realize they're agents of the devil, or God knows who they are, but they're just your mind blanks out. You don't listen to them. So he would not listen to me. He would regard me as being brainwashed,
Mhm.
and he would regard me the way I regard him.
Right.
as being irretrievably in a different reality. And
Yeah.
some truth to that, of course, that we are in different realities. And how to break through that is not easy at all. That was actually the subject of my most recent book. How do things change? How do you get out of that? How do you get out of that bubble?
Right.
It's not easy.
Yeah, I would wonder about that. I've spoken with people on this show who are in the cult professional space, particularly cult deprogrammer Rick Allen Ross, and
Mhm.
it seems something like going at the scriptures would be the last thing you'd want to do if he were trying to get someone out of, say, a radical Christian cult. He wouldn't go to that. He would first start to tell people more about the cult leader and say, here are some things. Here are things you should know about this person. Here are things that aren't out, and break that down rather than to shake someone out of their religious beliefs. So what does work for de-radicalizing?
Well, in the studies that I had, I looked at several movements, including ISIS and
Mhm.
the Sikh movement in Punjab, which is the one I first began with because I lived in the Punjab and I saw it
Yeah.
kind of develop first at hand, and then the moral movement in the Philippines, in Mindanao. And in all of these cases, what your deprogrammer said is, I think, right. That a loss of faith in the leadership, and the sense that there are deep fissures within the movement, internal divisions, and that makes a huge difference. Another is simply a loss of support from the surrounding community, because in the case of ISIS, the most of the supporters of ISIS didn't believe in this kind of crazy apocalyptic theological vision that the leaders believed in. They were supporting it simply because they were Sunni Arabs, and they were supporting Sunni Arabs, and the Shia who were in charge of Baghdad, was in charge of the country. They thought were oppressing them. So it was a Sunni Shia split, and they saw ISIS not as a religious movement, but as a movement for Sunni empowerment. And as soon as and as the movement continued, of course ISIS became a state for a couple of years, and so as their rule continued, and they saw it was not empowering Sunnis, and it was actually making matters worse in the relationship with Shia. A lot of that confidence began to shatter. In other words, our reality crept in. And another way our reality crept in was simply through human contacts. Restoring relationships, being able to, people ask me, what if my brother has become, captive at QAnon, what do I do? And my answer is love him, and talk with my own brother was kind of moving that direction, and we had long discussions, but I never tried to argue with him. I knew that was futile,
Yeah.
but I did try to love him, and to find areas that we were mutually concerned about. Our other brother, who was in a long-term care facility, and we had to take care of. So the ways of breaking through the we-they kind of impasse and talking about things of common concern and common interest that kind of builds those bridges to a shared reality and not the divisive one that we focus on.
Mark, we've talked how normal people, relatively normal people, can get caught up in these things. When you mentioned the Sunnis, it's reminding me of something that I believe I read in your book. I believe you quoted a journalist who said that he found that three groups of people generally were joining ISIS. It was Sunni pragmatists, true believers, and psychopaths. You said in meeting terrorists, you hadn't picked up on any obvious pathology, but I wonder, what do you think of pathological people, psychopaths and such, harnessing the energies of war and religion? Do you see that?
Oh yeah, it's scary. It's very scary.
Mm-hmm.
And you did see that in ISIS. Usually not in the leadership because they're fairly unstable people, but they're often useful tools. That is, these are the people who will, get involved in suicide attacks and to be the ones who would execute prisoners and to carry out some of the most savage acts of warfare, which might be a useful device for a movement like ISIS that runs on intimidation and fear. And these people help, continue those patterns of intimidation and fear. Um, but they're seldom in positions of extreme leadership.
Mm-hmm. Mark, we talked in the beginning about politics. I'm just curious, how do you see politics using war and religion today to stir people?
Well, there's this curious disconnect between thinking of war as politics by other means, as a strategic venture, and I'm thinking about, let's say, Putin in Ukraine or Netanyahu in Gaza, both of whom are very cold political actors, and they have political goals and objectives they want to achieve, but it involves some pretty awful stuff, and so they've made the kind of moral disengagement. But in order to get the population on the side, it has to be seen in grander terms. You can't say, "Oh, come, young Russian soldiers, we want you to give your lives in order that we can increase our territorial power in this region, a very cold and oil-rich region of." No, they can't say that. So they say, we're fighting for Mother Russia. And this is where the Russian Orthodox Church has been very helpful for Putin, where Patriarch Kirill of the Russian Orthodox Church describes the invasion of Ukraine as a holy war, as something sacred for the Russian Orthodox. He said the whole Russian Orthodox civilization is on the line, that this is an existential war between good and evil and right and wrong. And so with that kind of religious blessing ringing, Putin can say, well, this is, it's an all or nothing war. We're not going to cede territory. I mean, when he came to Alaska to meet with Trump, those of us who've been following this knew that Putin was going to say what he's always said. He was just going to put in flowery language and try to put it very pretty. And he's going to say, oh, yes, we're very close to working out a deal and everything will be fine as long as we remove the causes that created the war in the first place. What? Wait a second, you invaded Ukraine. What causes are you talking about? Well, put yourself in Putin's head. The causes are the whole idea that Ukraine is separate from Russia. That's the cause of the war. Okay, you get rid of that and just let Russia take over Ukraine. That solves everything in an instant. Yeah, from Putin's point of view, and he hasn't changed a whit. He's not deviating from that. That's an absolutistic vision. And the only thing that will make him change from that is force. The only reason why he hasn't taken Ukraine thus far is the remarkable resistance of Ukraine over these several years and the kind of support it's gotten from a large family of nations. And that's the only thing that will work, unfortunately.
Well, Mark, I'd like to talk a little bit as we wind down about ending war. Before I do, could we just get where people can look for you online?
Sure. I'm on Blue Sky. It's Juergensmeyer. I have my own weblog that Juergensmeyer.org. But you have to remember how to spell Juergensmeyer. It's a Juergensmeyer. Those are the two easiest ways to follow me.
Great. We'll put links in the description for people to check out. Mark, some things on the topic of ending war. First of all, should Christians become pacifists?
The reason I'm hesitating is that, I feel like I'm a pacifist to the bone. I hate the idea of war, and the idea of any kind of forceful coercion of another person. Along with writing about terrorism and war, I've also have a book on Gandhi. And I worked with Gandhians in India for a number of years, and I have great respect for him. But Gandhi also had the limits to his pacifism. And he said, if it's a choice between violence or passivity, doing nothing, he said, I would choose violence. So he was not a pacifist in the sense of being passive. When he saw a conflict, he said we should engage with it. Conflicts are something that tells us that we have different angles of vision on the world, and we need to reconcile those in some ways. That was a very interesting insight. That if you disagree with somebody, it means that, the other guy may be wrong, but maybe you're also a little bit wrong as well. You need to try to figure out how you can make things better. And sometimes Gandhi said force is appropriate. And he gave examples of coming across and seeing a sniper shooting at somebody. You have to get rid of that guy, the sniper, however you need to do it. Or this is an example that Gandhi gave of a rape in progress. You've got to get that guy off the woman. He's got to stop immediately, whatever. And if there's violence, if he dies in the process, that's his problem. And Gandhi did support the war effort. He supported the war effort of the British in World War I and also in World War II. He was a pragmatic pacifist. So when you ask whether Christians should be pacifists, I don't think they should be passive. They shouldn't be disengaged. They also shouldn't leap immediately to force and militarization of a conflict as if that's a simple solution, because often it's not. Often it makes things worse. But to ignore conflict and to not use force if necessary is also, I think, an easy and regrettable way out, and one that's not morally permissible. So yes, I think Christians should be pragmatic pacifists.
Mark, we've talked about how religion and war seem to create a feedback loop and grow each other. Could religion cure war? Is there some way there?
In some way, yes. I think in the way that we've been talking about. For one thing, it can take these absolutistic visions that are often a part of war and put them into a religious frame. And then we have a way of a kind of acting out or dealing with them in a more metaphorical way than in actually confronting somebody else. I think of this with QAnon, for example. I mean, the vision of QAnon was so close to the book of Revelation that if one just very easily substituted the real figure of Donald Trump as the savior who's going to come and rescue the world and say, wait a second, read the book of Revelation, it's Jesus we're talking about. You should be looking towards the ultimate savior, right? And to put this image back into the religious context in which it probably first came. I think religion can provide the metaphors and the way of thinking about alternative reality in a way that is very powerful, but usually doesn't lead directly to killing and violence in the world. And then religion can also provide the kind of healing that is so essential for the situations of conflict. When one of the key architects of the Vietnam War was asked how he would have done things differently when the U.S. approached the situation in Vietnam. Where did we go wrong? And he said, we were unable to empathize with the enemy. And that ability, and religion does have that characteristic of being able to love your neighbor as yourself, to put yourself in the minds of another person and to see how they see the world. And if in the case of Vietnam, if we saw more clearly how they saw the world, they would see that the Vietnamese didn't see this as a fight between communists and anti-communists. They saw it as a continuation of an anti-colonial struggle. And we were now the new colonial masters that they wanted to free themselves from. Well, we didn't want to be put in that position. We didn't think of ourselves that way. But if we had empathized with the enemy, we could have approached the whole situation differently. So I think religion does give us that capability. Jesus said there are only 2 commandments. Forget everything else. It's pretty simple. You don't even need to write it down. This is it. Love your God with all your heart and all your strength and all your mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. You got that? That's all you need to do.
A beautiful note to end on. Mark Juergensmeyer, thank you so much for writing your book, Why God Needs War and War Needs God, and for taking this interview with me and for your career of work on this topic of religion and violence. I really appreciate this.
Enjoy the conversation. Thanks, Brett.